Tonight, there is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing left to finish. No messages that have to be answered. The world will keep turning, even if, for just a little while, you allow yourself to simply rest. Perhaps today felt heavier than you expected. Maybe you carried worries about money. Maybe you kept replaying a conversation in your mind. Or perhaps you did everything you were supposed to do, yet something still felt missing. It is a strange feeling, is it not? Sometimes the feeling of not enough has nothing to do with what is in our bank account. Sometimes it quietly appears in a comfortable home, around a full dinner table, even in the middle of laughter shared with the people we love. And when night finally arrives, that quiet feeling seems to sit beside us. It says nothing. It asks for nothing. Yet somehow, it makes the heart feel just a little heavier. If you have ever felt that way, then tonight's story is for you. Not because it promises to change your life by morning. Not because it claims to reveal some magical secret. But because, for a little while, we can slow down together. Slow down enough to hear something we often miss beneath all the noise of everyday life. Now, imagine there is a narrow country road, far beyond the crowded highways, far beyond the glowing city lights. A quiet little road that never appears on any map. It seems to reveal itself only to those who have grown tired of always rushing. At the end of that road, there's a small village. Morning begins there with birdsong, not alarm clocks. Evening arrives without hurry. The doors close early, not because people are afraid, but because there is nothing more important than sitting on the front porch, watching the sky slowly change its colors. At the edge of that village, there is a garden. It is not grand. It is not perfect. There are no elegant fences, no carefully designed pathways, only a few vegetable beds, an old apple tree, a weathered stone well, and the gentle scent of fresh earth after the rain. If you listen carefully, you may hear the leaves whispering softly to one another. The quiet song of crickets greeting the night, water falling, one slow drop at a time, into an old wooden bucket. Everything here moves gently, so gently that even time itself seems to forget how to hurry. The keeper of this little garden is an old man. No one remembers exactly when he first arrived, when today's grandparents were children. He was already here. When they grew into adults, he was still here. And now, as their own hair begins to turn silver, he still sits in the same wooden chair each evening, watching his garden, smiling with the peaceful ease of someone who no longer feels the need to race through life. He has never been a wealthy man. His cottage is simple. His clothes have been carefully mended many times. His old boots have long since lost their original color. Yet no one has ever seen regret in his eyes. Not once. One afternoon, a traveler stopped beside the garden and asked, "Have you never wished for more?" The old man did not answer right away. Instead, he bent down, picked up a single apple seed that had fallen into the grass. He held it gently in the palm of his hand, looking at it for a long, quiet moment. Then, he smiled, a small smile, almost as soft as the evening breeze. Finally, he said, "Most people spend their lives chasing the fruit." He slowly turned the tiny seed between his fingers. But very few ever sit quietly long enough to understand the seed. The traveler stood there, confused. Perhaps you do not fully understand those words yet either. That is perfectly all right. Tonight, there is no need to hurry toward understanding, because sometimes the most beautiful truths do not arrive the moment we understand them. They arrive when the heart finally becomes still enough to receive them. Outside, the evening breeze continues to drift through the garden. The leaves of the old apple tree shimmer beneath the moonlight. The little teapot still gives off its gentle warmth, and the old gardener still sits quietly on his porch, as though he has been expecting one more visitor all along. That visitor is you. The traveler remained standing in silence. He looked at the tiny apple seed resting in the old man's hand, then back at the quiet garden. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night seemed to welcome the silence. A cool breeze wandered gently through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called softly into the darkness. The old gardener closed his hand around the little seed and slipped it carefully into the pocket of his worn coat. "Come," he said with a warm smile. "The tea is still hot." The traveler followed him without saying a word. There was something about this place, something impossible to explain. It was not beautiful in the way magazines describe beauty. It was not impressive. It was not luxurious. Yet, for reasons he could not understand, it felt like the safest place he had been in a very long time. The old man poured 2 cups of tea. The steam rose slowly into the cool evening air. Neither of them hurried to drink. Neither of them hurried to speak. After a while, the old gardener looked toward the stars and quietly asked, "When was the last time you watched the sky without thinking about tomorrow?" The traveler almost laughed. "I cannot remember." The answer surprised even him. He realized he could remember meetings, deadlines, bills, phone calls, appointments, but he could not remember the last sunset he had truly watched, or the last evening he had simply allowed himself to exist, without trying to fix something, without trying to become someone, without trying to get somewhere else. The old man nodded gently. It happens to many people. They become so busy building a life, they forget to live inside it. The traveler lowered his eyes. His fingers tightened around the warm cup. "I thought if I worked harder, if I earned more, if I finally reached the next goal, I would feel peaceful." He gave a small, tired smile. "But every time I reached one mountain, there was another waiting behind it, and another, and another." The old gardener listened quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not offer advice. He simply listened, as though there were nowhere else in the world he needed to be. For the first time in many months, perhaps even years, the traveler felt completely heard, without judgment, without comparison, without anyone trying to solve him. After a long silence, the old man stood up. "Walk with me." They wandered slowly through the little garden. The moonlight rested softly on the leaves. Tiny drops of water still clung to the vegetables after the evening mist. The old gardener stopped beside 2 apple trees. One was tall, strong. Its branches stretched proudly toward the sky. The other was much younger, small, quiet, barely taller than the traveler's shoulder. "Which tree do you think is happier?" the old man asked. The traveler smiled. "The large one, of course. It has everything." The old gardener smiled too. "That is what most people say." He gently placed his hand on the trunk of the young tree. "This little tree has never wished it were taller. It has never worried because the older tree bears more fruit. It simply drinks the rain, welcomes the morning sun, and grows one quiet day at a time." The traveler looked at the small tree again. This time, he noticed something he had missed before. Its leaves were brighter. Its branches moved freely with the breeze. It did not seem incomplete. It simply seemed present. The old gardener spoke almost in a whisper. "Only people compare their beginning to someone else's middle." The words drifted gently through the night. The traveler felt something shift inside him. Not because he had found an answer, but because, for the first time, someone had asked a different question. The garden became quiet again. The crickets continued their endless evening song. The stars seemed brighter now. Or perhaps his eyes were finally beginning to notice them. The old man looked toward the little cottage. "There's another story," he said softly. "A story about a cracked clay jar. Most people believed it was broken. but spent its entire life doing something perfect. The traveler looked at him with quiet curiosity. He had almost forgotten the worries he had carried into the garden. Almost. And somewhere deep inside, without realizing it, he had already begun to breathe a little more slowly. The old gardener picked up the lantern from a porch. Its gentle golden light swayed softly as they walked toward the stone well. The garden had grown even quieter. The moon had climbed higher into the night sky. Everything seemed wrapped in a peaceful stillness. As they reached the well, the old man stopped beside two large clay jars. One was smooth, perfectly shaped. Its surface reflected the lantern's warm glow. The other was different. A thin crack ran from its neck almost to its base. It looked old, fragile, as though it had already lived a very long life. The traveler pointed toward it. I suppose that one should have been replaced years ago. The old gardener smiled. So everyone tells me. He gently lifted the cracked jar. With practiced hands, he lowered it into the cool water. When he pulled it back up, tiny drops escaped through the narrow crack. The traveler watched the water slowly drip onto the ground. It is leaking. Yes, the old man replied. It always has. Then why keep using it? The old gardener did not answer immediately. Instead, he began walking slowly along a narrow path that led away from the well. The traveler followed. As they walked, water continued to fall from the cracked jar. One drop, then another. The old man finally stopped beside the path. Look carefully. The traveler lowered his eyes. Along one side of the trail, wildflowers stretched as far as the lantern light could reach. White flowers, blue flowers, small golden blossoms dancing gently in the breeze. The other side of the path was almost bare. Only dry grass grew there. The traveler frowned. I never noticed. The old gardener nodded. Most people never do. He slowly poured the remaining water beneath the old apple tree. Then he looked back toward the flowers. For many years, this little jar believed it was a failure. It thought its crack made it useless. It apologized to me every single day. The traveler smiled softly, as though a jar could apologize. The old man laughed. Perhaps not, but people do. They apologize for the parts of themselves they wish were different. He rested the lantern on a flat stone. Its warm light illuminated the flowers around them. I knew the jar could never carry all the water. So each spring, I scattered flower seeds along this side of the path. He paused. Every walk back from the well, the jar quietly watered them. Without ever realizing it, the traveler stood very still. The flowers suddenly looked different. Not ordinary, not accidental. They had been growing, little by little, one unnoticed evening at a time. The old gardener gently touched one of the blossoms. Some gifts are hidden inside the places we are most eager to hide. The traveler lowered his head. His thoughts drifted back through the years. The business that had failed, the opportunities he had missed, the friendships that had quietly faded away, the dreams that never unfolded the way he had imagined. For so long, he had looked at those memories as proof that something was wrong with him. Now, for the first time, he wondered if he had been asking the wrong question. Instead of asking, "Why am I broken?" perhaps he could ask, "What has quietly grown because of these cracks?" The old gardener seemed to hear the question without it ever being spoken. He smiled into the darkness. We spend so much of life trying to become perfect, but nature has never been interested in perfection. The forest is not perfect. The mountains are not perfect. The ocean is not perfect. And still, they're beautiful. A gentle breeze moved through the flowers. Their delicate petals shimmered beneath the moonlight. The traveler took a slow, deep breath. It felt different, lighter somehow, as though something he had carried for years had become just a little easier to set down. The old gardener picked up the lantern once more. "It is getting late," he said softly. "There is one more place I would like to show you. Far beyond the garden, beyond the apple trees, a quiet hill rested beneath the stars. From there, the entire valley could be seen." Without another word, the two of them began walking toward the hill, while somewhere behind them, the little cracked jar remained beside the well, its quiet purpose finally complete for another day. The path to the hill was quiet. Only the soft glow of the lantern moved through the darkness. The old gardener walked slowly, not because he was tired, but because he never seemed to believe that anything beautiful could be found by rushing. The traveler noticed something unusual. For the first time in many months, he was no longer thinking about what time it was. He was no longer wondering what tomorrow would bring. The endless list inside his mind had quietly fallen silent. Only the sound of their footsteps remained. The earth beneath them was cool. The night air carried the gentle fragrance of pine and wild grass. Somewhere far away, a small stream sang its endless song. As they reached the top of the hill, the old gardener placed the lantern on a flat stone. Its warm light seemed almost unnecessary. The moon had already painted the valley in silver. Below the little village slept peacefully. Tiny windows glowed like distant stars. Thin trails of smoke still drifted lazily from a few chimneys. Nothing was moving. Nothing was chasing. Nothing was competing. The traveler stood without speaking. He had never noticed how beautiful an ordinary night could be. After several quiet moments, the old gardener finally spoke. "When people come here, they usually ask me the same question." The traveler turned toward him. "What do they ask?" The old man smiled. "They ask how they can attract more. More money, more success, more opportunities, more happiness." He looked across the sleeping valley. "But almost no one asks, how can I finally feel that I already have enough?" The words settled gently into the silence. The traveler stared toward the distant lights. "I don't know if I have ever asked myself that." The old gardener nodded. "Most of us don't. We are taught to measure life by what comes next. The next paycheck, the next promotion, the next achievement, the next house, the next vacation, the next version of ourselves." He smiled softly. "And while we're always reaching for the next thing, we quietly lose the only place where life is actually happening." The traveler looked confused. "The only place?" The old man placed one hand over his heart. "Here. Now." The breeze moved gently around them. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky. The old gardener looked upward. "Do you know why people rarely notice the stars?" The traveler glanced toward the heavens. "There are thousands of them. They're impossible to miss." The old man chuckled. "And yet, in the brightest cities, people hardly see them at all." The traveler understood immediately. The lights. Exactly. The stars never disappear. We simply surround ourselves with so much noise that we can no longer see what has been quietly waiting above us all along. He paused. "The same is true for peace. The same is true for gratitude. The same is true for abundance. They do not always arrive. Sometimes they have been there all along. We simply forgot how to notice them." The traveler lowered his eyes. His chest tightened for just a moment. He thought about all the mornings he had rushed through breakfast, all the evenings he had spent staring at glowing screens, all the weekends he had promised himself he would rest, only to fill them with more work. He could not remember the last time he had watched the sunrise, or listened to the rain, or enjoyed a quiet cup of coffee without checking his phone. He suddenly wondered how many beautiful moments had quietly passed him by, simply because he had been looking somewhere else. The old gardener bent down and picked up a smooth stone. He placed it in the traveler's hand. Tell me, what do you feel? The traveler looked at it. It is just a stone. The old man smiled. Is it? The traveler turned it over slowly. It was warm, still holding the heat of the day. Its edges had been softened by years of wind and rain. It fit perfectly in his hand. The old gardener spoke gently. This stone has never wished to become a diamond. It has never envied the mountain. It has never hurried toward tomorrow. It simply became what time invited it to become. The traveler closed his fingers around the stone. He had held thousands of objects throughout his life. His phone, his wallet, his car keys, his briefcase. Yet somehow, this ordinary stone felt different. Not because it was valuable, but because, for the first time in years, he was truly paying attention. The old gardener smiled. Perhaps that is where abundance begins. Not when life gives us more, but when we finally learn to notice what has always been here. Neither of them spoke again. The wind continued its gentle journey across the hillside. Above them, the stars remained exactly where they had always been. Patient, silent, waiting for someone to finally look up. They remained on the hill for a long time. Neither of them felt the need to speak. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt comforting, like an old friend who understood that not every moment needed to be filled with words. The traveler sat down on the cool grass. The smooth stone was still resting in his hand. He rolled it gently between his fingers, as though it carried a quiet answer he had been searching for. After a while, he looked toward the old gardener. There is something I still do not understand. The old man smiled. Good. The traveler looked surprised. Good. If you understood everything tonight, there would be no reason to return tomorrow. The traveler laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh he had shared in a very long time. The old gardener reached into the pocket of his coat. Slowly, he opened his hand. The tiny apple seed was still there. He placed it carefully on his palm. So much of life, he whispered, can be found inside something this small. The traveler leaned closer. It looks so ordinary. It is. The old man nodded. And that is exactly why most people overlook it. He held the seed toward the moonlight. Tell me, have you ever seen a seed struggle to become a tree? The traveler frowned. No. Have you ever seen it compare itself with the trees around it? No. Have you ever seen it panic because spring arrived before it felt ready? The traveler smiled. Of course not. The old gardener looked at him with gentle eyes. Only people do those things. The breeze moved softly through the grass around them. The seed does not wake each morning wondering if it is enough. It does not measure its worth against the tallest tree. It does not fear that another seed will grow faster. It simply opens itself to the rain, to the sunlight, to time, day after day, without rushing, without doubting, without demanding that tomorrow arrive sooner. The traveler lowered his eyes. I've spent most of my life doing the opposite. The old man nodded. So have many of us. The traveler spoke quietly. I was always afraid. If I slowed down, I would fall behind. If I rested, someone else would move ahead. If I was grateful for what I had, I might stop growing. The old gardener listened carefully. Then he smiled. There is a difference between growing and running. He gently pressed the little seed into the traveler's hand. You can run for years and never truly grow. You can grow quietly, without anyone noticing, not even yourself. The traveler closed his fingers around the seed. It felt almost weightless, yet somehow it carried more meaning than many of the things he had spent years chasing. The old gardener looked across the valley once more. People often think manifestation means convincing the world to give them something. He paused. I have never believed that. The traveler looked up. The old man continued. I believe manifestation begins much earlier. It begins with becoming the kind of person who is ready to receive. He smiled gently. A closed hand cannot receive a gift. A hurried heart rarely recognizes one. The traveler remained silent. Those words settled deep inside him. The old gardener continued. Think about the garden. I never pull on the flowers to make them bloom. I never shout at the trees for growing too slowly. I never wake the seeds during the night to ask if they are working hard enough. He chuckled softly. I simply care for them. And then, I trust life to do what only life can do. The traveler looked back toward the little garden below. From the hill, it seemed so small. It suddenly felt larger than the entire world he had left behind. Perhaps because everything growing there had been given something he had rarely given himself. Patience. The old gardener slowly stood. He stretched his shoulders and smiled toward the eastern horizon. Morning is still many hours away. But do you know something beautiful? The traveler shook his head. Even now, while the world sleeps, the roots beneath every tree are still growing. No one applauds them. No one sees them. No one congratulates them. And yet, they continue. He looked warmly at the traveler. The most important growth in your life will almost always happen in silence. The traveler felt the cool night air fill his lungs. For the first time in years, he no longer felt the need to become someone else before tomorrow. Perhaps, like the little seed resting in his hand, he did not need to force his future into existence. Perhaps he only needed to keep showing up, one quiet day at a time. Far below, the old garden rested peacefully beneath the moon. The apple tree stood without effort. The wildflowers swayed with the breeze. And somewhere in the darkness, the little cracked jar waited beside the well, ready to water the flowers again. When the sun returned, the night grew even quieter. A thin blanket of mist began to drift across the valley below. The little village had disappeared beneath its soft embrace. Only the rooftops remained visible, floating gently beneath the moonlight like tiny islands in a peaceful sea. The traveler sat quietly beside the old gardener. The apple seed rested safely in one pocket. The smooth stone remained in the other. Two simple things, yet somehow they felt more valuable than many of the possessions he had spent years trying to protect. After a long silence, the old gardener spoke. When I was a young man, I believed I had all the time in the world. The traveler turned toward him. The old man's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. I thought there would always be another spring, another harvest, another chance to visit the people I loved. He smiled gently. But life has a quiet way of reminding us. That time is the one treasure none of us can keep. The traveler listened carefully. I spent many years trying to earn more money. So did many of my friends. We worked longer. We slept less. We promised ourselves one day we would finally slow down. One day we would travel. One day we would laugh more. One day we would sit together beneath the trees. The old gardener lowered his eyes. For some of them, that day never came. The breeze moved softly between them. Neither man spoke for a while. The silence carried no sadness, only truth. Finally, the traveler asked quietly, "Do you regret it?" The old gardener thought for a long moment. "I do not regret working. I do not regret planting gardens. I do not regret building this little home." He smiled. "But I do regret believing that life would patiently wait for me." The traveler felt those words settle deep inside him. He remembered all the birthdays he had rushed through because of work, the family dinners where his body had been present, but his mind had remained inside tomorrow, the phone calls he had promised to return, the vacations he had postponed. The sunsets he never stopped to watch. The old gardener continued softly. Many people believe abundance begins when they have enough money. I once believed that too. He looked toward the stars. But abundance begins the moment you realize that this evening, this breath, this conversation will never happen again. The traveler looked around him. The cool air, the scent of pine, the distant sound of running water, the warmth of the lantern beside them. He suddenly understood something. None of these moments could be saved. None could be repeated. Their beauty existed because they were passing. The old gardener gently reached down and picked up a single fallen leaf. Its edges had already begun to turn golden. When I was younger, I used to feel sad when autumn arrived. I thought the falling leaves meant something beautiful was ending. He turned the leaf slowly in his hand. Now, I see something different. I see the tree making room for another spring. The traveler smiled. So letting go is part of growing. The old man nodded. Always. If the tree refused to release its leaves, there would be no room for new ones. If yesterday never ended, tomorrow could never begin. The traveler watched as the old gardener released the leaf. The wind carried it gently into the darkness. Neither of them tried to follow it. Neither of them tried to hold it. The old gardener whispered, "Peace is rarely found in holding tighter. It is often found in opening our hands." The traveler slowly opened his own hand. He looked at the tiny apple seed resting in his palm. Just hours earlier, he would have seen only something small. Now, he saw possibility. He saw patience. He saw trust. The old gardener looked at him and smiled. "You came here hoping to discover how to attract abundance." The traveler nodded. "I think. I was searching for a secret." The old gardener chuckled softly. "There's one." The traveler waited. The old man looked toward the sleeping valley. The people who always feel poor are not always those who have the least. They are often those who never notice what has already been placed into their hands. The traveler looked down at the seed once more, then toward the stars, then toward the quiet little garden waiting below. For the first time, he felt no urgency, no pressure to become someone different before morning. Only gratitude for being exactly where he was. And somehow, that felt richer than anything he had experienced in years. Above them, the stars continued their silent journey across the endless sky. Patient, unhurried, exactly as they had done, long before either of them was born, and exactly as they would continue to do, long after both of them were gone. The night was beginning to soften, far beyond the eastern hills. The darkness had become just a shade lighter. Morning was still a long way off. Yet something in the air had changed. The traveler noticed it before he could explain it. The silence no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt like home. For years, he had believed silence was something to escape. He filled it with music, with endless conversations, with television, with notifications, with plans, with worries, anything to avoid being alone with his own thoughts. Now, sitting beside the old gardener, he realized that silence had never been his enemy. It had simply been waiting, patiently, for him to stop running. The old gardener slowly poured the last of the tea into 2 small cups. The tea was no longer hot, only warm. He smiled. Some things are sweetest when they're no longer trying to be perfect. The traveler accepted the cup. He took a slow sip. The flavor was gentle, simple, nothing extraordinary. And yet, he could not remember the last time he had truly tasted a cup of tea. The old man looked toward the first birds beginning to stir in the trees. "Do you hear them?" The traveler listened carefully. One bird sang, then another answered. Soon, the entire garden seemed to awaken, one quiet voice at a time. "No bir guats." for permission to sing. They did not compare their song. They simply greet the morning. The traveler smiled. I think people have forgotten how. The old gardener nodded. We spend so much time wondering how we appear, that we forget how it feels to simply be alive. The breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers across the hillside. The old man closed his eyes for a moment. When I was your age, I believed happiness was waiting somewhere in the future. So I hurried, I chased, I worried, I collected, I achieved. He opened his eyes again. And every time I arrived somewhere new, happiness had already moved somewhere else. The traveler lowered his head. I know that feeling. The old gardener looked at him kindly. One day, I became too tired to keep chasing. So I stopped. The traveler looked up. And then what happened? The old man smiled. I noticed. Happiness had been quietly walking beside me all along. Neither of them spoke. The traveler watched a single ray of moonlight resting on the old apple tree. He suddenly remembered something. When I first arrived, I thought your garden was ordinary. The old gardener laughed softly. It is ordinary. The traveler slowly shook his head. No, I think. I simply didn't know how to see it. The old man's smile grew warmer. There are many kinds of blindness. Some people cannot see with their eyes. Others cannot see because they never stop looking for something else. The traveler looked around him once more. The weathered wooden bench, the stone well, the cracked clay jar, the tiny wildflowers, the old apple tree. Nothing had changed. Yet, everything felt different. Or perhaps, the one thing that had changed was him. The old gardener reached into his pocket. He carefully took out the tiny apple seed once more. Without saying a word, he placed it in the traveler's hand. I think it belongs to you now. The traveler looked surprised. I cannot take this. The old man gently closed the traveler's fingers around the seed. It was never mine. I was only caring for it until you were ready. The traveler looked down at the little seed. Such a small thing. Yet it now carried every conversation they had shared, every quiet moment, every lesson, every silence. The old gardener stood and looked toward the horizon. The day will come. When you leave this garden, you will return to busy streets, to responsibilities, to people who are still rushing. The traveler felt a quiet sadness. I don't want to forget this place. The old man smiled. You won't, because the garden was never the lesson. The traveler looked at him. The garden simply reminded you of something that was already growing inside you. A gentle breeze passed between them. The first hint of dawn painted the edge of the sky with soft shades of blue. The old gardener whispered, real abundance is not something you chase. It is something you recognize. And once you recognize it, you begin carrying it everywhere you go. The traveler looked at the seed resting safely in his hand. For the first time in many years, he no longer wished to become someone else. He no longer wished to be somewhere else. He no longer wished for tomorrow to arrive more quickly. This moment, this quiet hillside, this simple breath was enough. And somehow, enough felt like more than he had ever imagined. The first light of dawn slowly touched the distant hills. The stars faded one by one, not because they had disappeared, but because the morning had arrived. The old gardener stood quietly beside the traveler. Neither of them tried to hold on to the night. Some moments are beautiful precisely because they know how to end. The birds welcomed the new day. A soft golden light drifted across the little garden. The apple tree stood exactly where it had always stood. The wildflowers along the narrow path gently opened toward the sun. The cracked clay jar still rested beside the old stone well. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. The traveler looked around one last time. It was difficult to explain. The cottage was still small. The wooden chair was still worn. The garden was still simple. There was no hidden treasure, no miracle waiting beneath the old apple tree, no secret that promised endless wealth. Only a quiet life, lived with an open heart. The old gardener smiled. People often believe they must find a different world in order to find peace. He gently shook his head. But peace is always preferred. The world that is already here. The traveler closed his eyes for a moment. He listened. The birds, the wind, the leaves, the distant stream, his own breathing. For the first time in years, nothing inside him felt as though it needed to be fixed. The old gardener picked up the empty teapot. It is almost time. The traveler nodded slowly. I suppose I should go. The old man looked toward the road that disappeared beyond the hills. Yes, you should, but before you do, there is one last thing I would like you to remember. The traveler waited quietly. The old gardener spoke with the same calm voice that had carried every story through the night. One day, you will wake up worried again. You will have difficult mornings. There will be unexpected bills. There will be disappointments. There will be moments when fear quietly knocks on your door. He smiled gently. When those days come, do not ask yourself, how can I find abundance? Instead ask, what has already been given to me today that I have not yet noticed? The traveler felt his eyes become warm. He looked down at the tiny apple seed resting safely in his hand. The smooth stone still waited inside his pocket. Neither of them could solve every problem in his life. But perhaps they did not need to. Perhaps they only needed to remind him to look differently. The old gardener continued. Some people spend their entire lives waiting for life to become extraordinary. They miss thousands of ordinary mornings without realizing those mornings were the extraordinary life they had been hoping for. The traveler smiled, not because every question had been answered, not because every burden had disappeared, but because, for the first time, he understood that peace does not begin when life becomes perfect. Peace begins when we stop asking life to be perfect. He stepped forward, then stopped. He turned back toward the old gardener. Will I ever see you again? The old man smiled with quiet kindness. Every time you slow down, every time you notice the sky, every time you choose gratitude over fear, you will find this garden again. The traveler stood silently for a moment. Then he bowed his head with quiet respect, not because the old gardener had given him instructions, but because he had given him something far more precious, a different way of seeing. The traveler began walking down the little country road. The morning light grew brighter with every step. After a while, he turned around. The cottage was no longer there. The garden had disappeared into the soft morning mist. Only the old apple tree could still be seen, standing peacefully beneath the rising sun. Or perhaps he had only imagined seeing it. The traveler smiled. It no longer mattered, because he finally understood. The garden had never been a destination. It had always been a place growing quietly inside his own heart. And now, as another ordinary day gently began, he carried with him no promises of overnight riches, no secret formula, no magic words, only a quieter mind, a lighter heart, an open hand, and the quiet understanding that abundance is not something waiting for us somewhere in the future. It begins the very moment we become fully awake to the life that has already been lovingly placed before us. So tonight, if this story has found its way to you, may you rest without carrying tomorrow upon your shoulders. May your heart become a little lighter. May your mind become a little quieter. And when morning comes, may you notice, even for just a single moment, that life has already given you more beauty than fear ever allowed you to see. Sleep peacefully and let tomorrow arrive. in its own perfect time. Before you drift into sleep tonight, there is nothing you need to become, nothing you need to prove, nothing you need to earn before you are worthy of peace. The day is over now. Whatever was finished was enough. Whatever remains unfinished can wait until the morning. The stars have never rushed across the sky. The seasons have never hurried from one to the next. The old apple tree never worried about tomorrow's fruit. And your heart does not need to carry tomorrow tonight. Perhaps, as you close your eyes, you will remember the little garden, the old wooden chair, the quiet stone well, the cracked clay jar, the wildflowers that bloomed because of an imperfection, the tiny apple seed resting patiently in the palm of your hand. Those places may exist only inside a story, but the peace they point toward has always existed inside you. If tomorrow brings joy, welcome it with gratitude. If tomorrow brings challenges, meet them with gentleness. Not because life will always be easy, but because a peaceful heart does not wait for easy days. It learns to breathe, even through difficult ones. As you slowly sink into sleep, allow every breath to become softer than the last. Feel your shoulders grow lighter. Feel your thoughts become quieter. There is nowhere else you need to go, nothing else you need to chase. For this one quiet night, you have already arrived. May your dreams be gentle. May your heart remain open. And when the morning sun finally finds your window, may you remember, real abundance was never waiting somewhere far away. It was quietly walking beside you, every step of the journey. Good night, sleep deeply, and may peace stay with you until we meet again beneath another quiet sky.